So today's video is on defining my personal unbelief. My Christian viewers may want to know how definitionally petty I may or may not be when it comes to defining my unbelief in God and Christianity. You'll find I'm not picky at all with the terms you would prefer and the framing of just about any debate. Do I merely lack belief in any God? Yes, I'm technically an agnostic omni-apatheist because in an infinite multiverse, all logically possible super beings would exist. But given the term belief so often conflates the intellectual acceptance of an idea with trust and loyalty to the deity in question, I definitely lack that. I think an infinite multiverse is the most likely greater metaphysical state of affairs for our universe, uh, which are arguments that I cover elsewhere. But I don't really know that's true, and I certainly don't know that's true in any way that could motivate me in any personal religious sense. A best metaphysical guess is hardly the proper perch for profound piety. So I'm partial, i.e., I lean that way intellectually, but ultimately agnostic about all of that. Science can do its job and get back to me. And naturally, I'm apathetic as to the shenanigans of any deities that might be strewn across all of reality that I don't happen to occupy. Do you not just know if some God exists? Agnosticism. Yeah, there are lots of logically possible gods, and I don't know anything about them if they're real. And for purposes here, just in general, for practicality's sake, you can consider me at my core as an agnostic humanist. At the end of the day, venturing beyond that is a tall tower of speculation that doesn't have a lot of personal implications, at least from my perspective. Do you actually have a cumulative case of philosophical arguments and scientific and historical evidences that show that almost certainly the most popular conceptions of God are false and that metaphysical naturalism is true? Yes. You'll find I have a formidable negative case against biblical Christian theism as well as a formidable positive case for metaphysical naturalism. There are many good reasons to believe the universe just exists as unintentional stuff, that humans are a complex incidental result of the particularities of that unintentional stuff, and that the God of the Bible does not exist, does not represent moral goodness, and isn't the explanation of the origin of, well, anything. Isn't atheism just your religion? You could even call my atheism my religion if you want to. I don't see how that's very helpful, but I'm totally fine with that, as calling something a religion doesn't make it false. Check your stigmas and opt for substance. That's what I would recommend. I mean, in that event, I just believe in the true religion that has the best evidence. Is that a problem? Do you just want God to not exist so that you can sin? For the record, according to Christianity, everyone is a biased sinner. Therefore, all people, including every single last supposed Christian reading this or watching this, is guilty of being prone to believing conveniently false things about God in the service of their sin. I'm going to make lots of biblical arguments across these videos, and I already have, and my Christian viewers especially are likely going to squirm out of them with bad arguments because they don't like the morality of their own Bible. As an atheist, I get to be perfectly honest about what the Bible teaches, because I really don't care one way or the other. Whatever it says is whatever it says. And let's not pretend Christians don't regularly quite publicly announce their motivated reasoning when it comes to wanting God and heaven to exist and how much they can't stand the idea of a meaningless atheist world. All the sinners hopelessly lost in their sin don't erase that elephant in the room one bit. Also, for the record, there are approximately 600 laws in the Old Testament and about 800 in the New Testament. Most Christians have not even read the Bible and don't even know what most of them are. Odds are every human on earth wants to live a life violating more than 0 of the 1,400 of them. So yes, I just want to sin applies to basically everyone. Let's be real. Virtually all Christians who are biblically literate aren't exactly plausibly tethered to the immense millstone of ancient human moral error that we get from having to consider the Bible authoritative, and for good reason. There's no way to elegantly marry the brutal tribal ethics of an ancient warring nation state that we get from Moses to the extremist end of the world magical doormat advice of a celibate supremacist perfectionist vagabond that we get from Jesus, not to mention the radical communism of the early church in Acts. And somehow this is all supposed to be embodied in the curious, culturally warmed over ethics of the modern self loathing consumerist evangelical middle class? at least in the US. You want to show me a single Christian who can string all of that together coherently, all the while pretending like they have the moral high ground in relation to postmodern ideals of things like Star Trek and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I don't know a single person even comes close to living a lifestyle obviously in lockstep with the full range of morality the Bible ham-handedly presents. If there's a way to do that, I don't know what it is, and I can't help but notice no supposed Christian does either. I guess I must just not be smart enough to be a true Christian. Maybe that's the problem. Don't you just hate God? And that's the reason for all this? Oh, I do think the God character of the Bible is quite objectively evil, and on behalf of all of humanity that he's threatening with eternal torture, I don't want him to exist. Just like I don't want Loki, Ultron, Thanos, Kang, Arishem, and Galactus to exist. Protecting humanity, including the vast majority of Christians who almost certainly wouldn't make it into Jesus' heaven, seems like a good reason to me. You're welcome. Evidence God exists wouldn't prove he's good. You'd have to also prove he's good. Is that asking too much? Kind of telling if the answer is no, isn't it? Even if I were a selfish, evil person, would that mean I can't conclude God exists if he does? You'd think that perhaps even an evil person might want to objectively know the truth here. Just like I'd want to know if China is going to take over and set up a surveillance state here in this country and judge me by their own measure. Misrepresenting the evidence of that being true or not true, if it were true, wouldn't be very helpful. Threats are threats, and even a sinner might want to know if the threats are, credible. So let's set aside accusations of motivated reasoning that no one can ever prove anyway, and just stick to the publicly defensible arguments. Surely even the worst person on death row is entitled to an opinion here. You're just going to have to set aside that your cult think handbook says a critic is necessarily evil if they don't inherently think the Christian God is awesome. And I'll set aside the fact that you're probably a credulous fool for buying into an obvious metaphysical scam and letting your opening public argument be two formal fallacies, that is, an ad hominem and an appeal to authority. The opinion of a God who would have taken the wrong side of the Civil War and who thinks homosexuality is an abomination is not very high on my personal priority list. That kind of God to me has the approximate moral clout of a Middle Eastern dictator who accidentally came into possession of the Infinity Gauntlet. Everyone is biased to some degree and has to work diligently to seek greater and greater impartiality in the service of responsible public debate. An unavoidable admission of bias is not an excuse to submit to one's own partiality, and not everyone's biases are contrived equally. If a space alien named Jesus shows up spouting classic Armageddon nonsense from the red-lettered lips of Jesus in the Gospels, for the sake of protecting humanity, I'd recommend that the nuclear-powered nations shoot to kill. Not that I'd ever be asked, and not that I ever expected to even happen. But if it did happen, it would be far more likely to be actual aliens appropriating the popular religious conventions of the day, like how aliens impersonate Egyptian gods in the movie Stargate, than an actual Jesus. But I'd recommend nuking them out of orbit in any event. Is that shocking? Or are the pervasive apocalyptic threats of Jesus in the Gospels morally shocking, and if carried out would be truly horrific beyond words? Naturally, self-identifying Christians will presume that they themselves and their family and friends to be saved, presume Jesus is the very definition of goodness, and presume anyone at the sharp end of a second coming of Jesus' stick morally deserves it. Hence, they must also presume there must be something terribly wrong with me for the suggestion that we, nuke Jesus. But is that at all a reasonable understanding of the morality of Jesus as portrayed in the Gospels? Is it at all reasonable to think that anyone who reads and watches these videos, including self-identifying Christians, will be amidst the handful of saints being saved? I'm not reacting to biblically illiterate country club Christianity's warm and fuzzy buddy Jesus with his immaculate portrait on the wall, his inappropriately Caucasian baby blue eyes staring wistfully into space, who just wishes everyone would try a little harder to be a better, more forgiving person today. That doesn't even begin to at all accurately represent how Jesus is portrayed in the Bible. What I call canonical gospel reading comprehension Jesus was a perfectionist nutcase who intended to return with an army of angels to set the vast majority of humanity on fire for the crime of being imperfect according to the fine details of Mosaic law. If you read carefully what Jesus' values are and how things are supposed to turn out, the body count of his brand of eternal punishment would almost certainly include me, everyone I've ever known or even heard of, as well as probably every Christian watching this. So my advice to nuclear nations across the world is given with the same level of casual conviction that agrees that the fictional Avengers did the right thing by stopping Loki, Ultron, and Thanos in the Avengers movies. It's not because I hate good things and love evil things, it's because Jesus, when properly understood, makes a way better comic book supervillain than he does a cosmic savior. Don't pretend that's my fault. Christian culture brought the Bible to my doorstep, and they're going to blame me for reading it and taking the content more seriously than they do. Please. Why is Jesus like that? Probably because the ancients were used to the tyranny of empires and the early Christians merely invented their own brand of supernatural imperial response, which brought all the evils that went with it. All the standard cultural sins most people of the day took for granted as perfectly reasonable. I imagine most of the empires used to act like cultural supremacist Nazis looking to conquer, murder, torture, and subjugate all those opposed to their way of life. Hitler was only Big Bad Hitler because everyone else, other than the Japanese, had stopped acting like normal empires. The incidental success of Christian culture merely preserved a very stinky slice of those old values. And Christians just don't know their own sacred texts and then misrepresent the obvious contents when they're called out on it. Or they double down and say, yeah, that's exactly what it is, and I love it. Whichever. So if you've reacted poorly to all this, please note that from my perspective, you're mad at me for reading comprehension and the equivalent of not cheering for the villains in superhero movies. You're going to have to win many specific arguments on merit to change that from a virtue of mine. As it stands, from my perspective, it's an obvious vice of yours as a complicit Christian defending encultured credulity, obscurantism, virtually all the standard sins of ancient human cultures, and genuine moral horrors. You'll find various issues throughout my videos framed in terms of anything from agnostic humanism, for the philosophical home field advantage in most cases, to strong atheism and metaphysical naturalism when it comes to God and Allah, to agnostic omni-apatheism if we dare venture into positive speculative metaphysics, and even to at least 4 different forms of alternate biblical supernaturalisms that are more probable than mainstream Christian dogma. There are a lot of very obvious problems with biblical Christianity, and often it hardly matters how much ground is given, as there are almost always further fatal issues frolicking about. So how would you like to define my unbelief? Pick one of the above. It won't matter. Even the stark raving epistemic supremacism of Christian presuppositionalists are going to find they lose a proper debate on their own terms, even after they've conveniently defined away all ordinary common ground knowledge to avoid any evidential burden that doesn't favor their preferred assumptions. It's because Christianity is false, and there are tons of ways to know that. The Bible is a big ancient book filled with a lot of human error on a wide range of topics. Any big ancient book is going to falter and fail similarly. This should not be at all surprising. Even Sir Isaac Newton, who single-handedly took legit science forward in a bewildering landslide on multiple topics, still believed in a hefty amount of complete bullshit. You really shouldn't have gotten past the talking snake, but you did, didn't you? And so here we are. Is that insulting? Well, I imagine just about everyone who exits the religion in hindsight thinks about the talking snake and kicks themselves, realizing they probably should have figured it out much sooner that the Bible was reality challenged, even if they'd spent 40 years as a Christian. Just go ask them, and then be offended. You're probably not stupid, you're probably not uneducated, you're probably not evil, and you probably think you're trying to do the right thing in good faith. But you have been grossly misled by the Christian cultures that came before you. Let me help you walk that back in my videos. We are absolutely lucky to be where we are in history in terms of scientific and academic knowledge, even given its current foibles. Let's not squander it together. So hopefully my Christian viewers aren't petty or shallow and are sufficiently capable of engaging substance over superficial tribalistic atheist versus Christian feuding. We'll see. If you are confused or have some problem with what I've said in the video, you're going to have a bad time with all my videos. But if what I've said makes sufficient sense, then please keep watching.